All right, Zig coming in on the top. Today on the show, we have Rebecca Pidgeon, storyteller, singer, multi-instrumentalist, and actress. Rebecca Pidgeon is putting out her 10th studio album called Parts of Speech, Pieces of Sound. It's available now on all streaming platforms. And so Rebecca, this was a very enlightening and thoughtful conversation, and I'm very appreciative of it. Her new record, Parts of Speech, Pieces of Sound, is really well put together. It's orchestrated in such a way where it takes Eastern and Western sounds and blends them together in a way that's uniquely portraying like this yoga journey she's gone on. And it's fascinating because if you heard any of her earlier works, it's completely different, but completely her and completely encapsulating. We're going to listen to a tune off the record. This is Silent Sound off Parts of Speech, Pieces of Sound, Rebecca Pidgeon. Silent Sound, Rebecca Pidgeon, Parts of Speech, Pieces of Sound, available now on all streaming platforms. That chorus melody though, right? Isn't that cool? It's a really cool, catchy bit, and I really think it brings out the narrative of the tune, and we're going to get into the narrative of this tune in this conversation, and Rebecca's going to explain it way better, and we touch upon the point about how all aspects of this album kind of bring up the narrative of this tune in a way. Anywho, if you can rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on any of the podcast platforms, it helps me keep talking to cool guests and sharing their insight with you. And here we go. It's my conversation with Rebecca Pidgeon. Parts of Speech is an amazing record.
Oh, thank you.
I've been Howard sent me the advanced of it, and when he sends me stuff, I usually just put on everything and just listen to it without reading anything about it, just to hear.
Yes.
And
good idea. Yeah.
Right, because, I don't know, because you put a narrative before you hear it, and I think it works better if you kind of experience it yourself.
Yes.
And through that, after that, I usually dive into everything else. And this record has such an amazing composition of the rhythm, the rhythm section is so tight in this album, and it's interesting because going through all your other albums of 4, you hit upon all these kind of different styles of music from around the world. And from what I understand, your mother was a yoga teacher, right?
She is a yoga teacher, yeah.
Very cool. So, growing up, were all these, because I think your second record, Four Marys, that was a Scottish folk tunes, right? So
that was my third record on Chesky Records label out of New York, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so is that, are all these cultures you grew up with?
Well, my mother started working with BKS Iyengar in Pune in India in 1981 when I was a teenager. And so, yes, I grew up with that kind of this figure in my family, which was affected her very much and affected me very much too. And she was my first teacher of yoga. But I wasn't influenced by the music of India until much later on in my yoga practice. But the music of Scotland, of course, informed my whole growing up there.
Okay, so when your mom was practicing yoga, and did you pick up on more of because it's interesting, yoga has 2 really profound practices. There's the spiritual and kind of mental approach that I think kind of gets overshadowed by the yoga fitness, lose weight, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's it's almost just the exercise is kind of what most people buy into in a way, but growing up with someone who's actually practicing it, did you kind of get both ends of that from as a kid?
I think so, yes, very much, because she was studying with the master in India, and for him, of course, it was a spiritual and religious practice. But when he came to the West, he was asked not to bring that into the teaching, and he just wanted to um, convey yoga to as many people as he could, and so he left out the religious aspect of it and taught asana, which is the physical expression. I mean, asana does become a prayer, it does become a spiritual practice, but it can also, the byproduct or the main product for the West was the exercise and health, I suppose. And people came to it, as did Iyengar himself, because of poor health. And that's what initially draws people in. But I think now, since lockdown, Prashant Iyengar and Abhijata Iyengar, who are now leading the family, leading the teaching, because BKS Iyengar has died and his daughter Geeta Iyengar died. So now Sri Prashant Iyengar and Abhijata Iyengar are the main teachers, and they brought their teaching online during lockdown, during the COVID. And so it makes a kind of a more immediate connection for all of us in the West with the Iyengar family, and that spiritual aspect is their main focus, and that's what they teach. I mean, they teach asana, but they are following it as a dharma, And so I think we're getting exposed to that much more now in the West. Although, yoga still very much in the West there's something called pop yoga.
Yeah.
Prashant Iyengar refers to it as pop yoga, which is, sweat it out and work out, and stuff like, which is, fine too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's like a step towards it, because as you're going through all these poses and taking the time to breathe in and center yourself, I think the people that really get moved by it pick up on the spiritual aspects sooner, through it's kind of like getting your first record, and it's like, I don't know, Kiss or something, and then you find out about John Coltrane. You're like, you move through the waves,
go deeper.
Yeah. It's interesting because out of Cleveland we had a museum out of the art museum we had an exhibit on the art of yoga, and it shows all these ancient drawings and scriptures and all, and had a really cool aspect of the music part of it, and it really opened up my perception of how as a spiritual practice, just how old and profound it's been in all over the world, because I've done a few yoga courses, and I know a lot of friends that are really into it, and so kind of secondhand exposure to it, and it's always been a very pleasant experience and a very opening experience. But I imagine that would be way more enriched if my mother was, what I mean, being a part of that every day and making it that practice. How old were you when you started doing this with your mom?
18.
18. So that's a pretty changing time for anyone's life.
But then soon after that, I went off to drama college in London, and pursued my career. So I didn't really come back to yoga until I was around 30. I mean, I did it sporadically, but not seriously at all.
Did you notice the idea of a dedication to a practice like yoga paid off for going into learning acting methods?
That's interesting. An interesting question. I think it certainly helps with grounding and centering yourself and calming yourself down. Not that it's a, people say, oh, you do yoga, how relaxing. It's not a relaxing practice. It's hard work, very hard work. But it is transforms your mind and transforms your body.
When did you pick studying acting? Was there because I know it was theater, right? So was there an approach to that you focused
Well, I
on?
went to a drama school called RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, in London. And they didn't really, when I went there, they didn't really have a method like they did in the States. There was no method. There was just, we had voice classes and classes in Shakespeare and movement classes, but it was run like a repertory theatre when I was there. So directors from the outside, from the theatres in London would come in to direct us students, and we'd do about 3 plays per semester, and we were always working on a play, and with interesting people, very interesting people. Derek Jarman came in to teach us, and Bill Gaskell, and all sorts of interesting, Ken Campbell, directors who were active in the London theatre at the time. And then we'd be performing them. So that's we kind of learned through doing, which is another, which you kind of learn through experience in yoga as well. But this album that I wrote was inspired through yoga practice, but it's not yoga music. It's not meditative music, and it's not music to do yoga by, and it's not supposed to be instructive or a teaching in any way. It's simply, I was inspired by my experiences, and what came out of that is the music on this record, and I would describe it as contemporary art, pop /rock /world music. And I started it, as you perceived, with drums, with rhythm and samples, and I approached it with a keyboard using different sampled sounds. That's kind of how I wrote it, which is different from what I normally do, which is I normally write on a guitar. So I approached this quite differently, and also the compositional aspect, was just, sometimes I would compose a melody without even being near an instrument at all, just mentally, and then come to the keyboard and make string arrangements or whatever, But I think one of the main instruments that inspired me was the tanpura, which I didn't know about this instrument, but the yoga teacher was talking about the tanpura. She was likening it to the mantra Om, that is like a kind of a universal reverberation, and it's in us. And she said it's like the tanpura. And I thought, what is that? So I looked it up, and it's this drone instrument. It's a string instrument, and it's used in all Indian classical music. And it reminded me of the bagpipe drone, which is what I grew up with in Scotland, in Scottish folk music and martial music. You go to any street corner in Edinburgh during the festival, there's always some bagpiper, with his hat out, collecting coins and playing the bagpipe. So you're doing your shopping to this music of the bagpipes. It's just in my bones. And when I heard the tanpura, it immediately sparked off ideas. And I felt at home with it.
It's an interesting instrument, right? Because it's like the sitar you see in the back that's just droning that one note, and that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. That coming from like with bagpipes, because bagpipes have like they're 2-in-1, right? You got that drone note, and then you hear the melody on top of it.
Yeah,
it's really interesting how one constant sound can inspire so much from it.
Yes, that's so true.
And that's really cool. And like the idea of like this record,
there's something very, very grounding and soothing about it, and then you're free to improvise on the top of it, right? Which is it's a bit like flying. It's very lovely.
Yeah, and like it's almost like in like I guess in like Western music, when you think about like the intervals and like which ones are dissonant and which ones are resolved, right? It's like with that, because it's that constant thing, you're just moving from between those two so fluently that it doesn't matter if it's a dissonant, it resolves right away, like it makes that freedom of not worrying about keys and movement.
Very interesting. That's very interesting. Yes. And so I think I had a kind of freedom to be a bit improvisational in the composition.
Because the whole record sounds very, very tight. It's very well put together, and
Thank you.
it's interesting, like hearing like, or at least the idea of parts of speech and pieces of sound, and like kind of approaching it that way from all these different cultures, because the rhythm is like, it's, there's a pretty good four, section, or it's like in that pocket, but you hear tabla, and you're hearing like electronic instruments, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's also the pieces of different musical speech,
Mm.
which is a really
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool uh, overall arch of the concept of the record, uh, musically displayed.
Mm. Mm. Thank you so much. Yes, I wanted to get that across because that's what I was experiencing in the practice, this parts of speech referring to what are called pranakriyas and bija mantras. Bija means seed, and a one bija mantra, for example, that everybody knows is the mantra Om. And it's called a seed mantra because everything grows from a seed, right? Um, and the teacher told a wonderful story. She was teaching us about pranakriyas, which are basically syllables, just sounds, like e, u, or lu, la, and you're saying these internally, mentally, in pranayamic practices, breath work, which, you know, firstly, of course, calms down your mind because you're just thinking of these sounds. You're saying them. You're literally saying them, but silently in your head. So immediately your mind is kind of tethered to that, and it's not doing its usual wanderings. It does wander away, but you bring it back. And she told a story about a young girl as an analogy for these pranakriyas. She says a young girl goes to a temple every day for years, and is overheard by a priest who eventually approaches her and asks her, little girl, what are you doing? Because she goes to the temple to pray, but he hears that she's saying the sounds of letters. She's just reciting the alphabet. So he says, what are you doing? She says, well, I don't know prayers, but I know the letters, and so I'm saying the letters to God for God to put them in the correct order to make sacred meaning, to make the meaning that I'm not able to make an appropriate prayer. And she says, the yoga teacher said, because these sounds are just parts of work, that they're the building blocks of language, but they have no meaning and no associations, memory associations or anything. They're just pure sound. And because of that, they have a kind of hypnotizing, soothing effect. And they become, you therefore sort of lull yourself into a kind of a sanctified place where you're more pure, and it becomes a prayerful practice through those seed sounds.
That's so profound. That's really cool. It's interesting because like we see that with like kids, when they're trying to say a thing,
Mm.
you know what I mean? Like they'll babble, and it's like it sounds like they're saying mama or they're close to grandpa, and like, but they're not, and like
Mm-hmm.
there's that bliss that comes from that, like this excitement that they're not saying it, they're saying, you know what I
I
mean?
know.
That's
I know. I just read a brilliant thing by Rebecca West just on that topic the
yeah,
other day, where she says, little children or animals speak in sentences when they're pre-verbal, they speak in sentences, and because they're saying la 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 la, and
yeah,
they're emphasizing different words. They're doing a cadence of a sentence, right? And she says the child knows perfectly well how to see the doll and get, his mom to give him the doll by his babbling. And when the adults in his life slow him down by making him learn the word doll, he's kind of puzzled because he's like, yes, I know what that is. I know how to get it. And it's like a kind of slowing down of his mind. I thought that was really funny.
It's really interesting too because like you know how to get the thing you want, right? And like now
Yes.
you got to find a way to define it to the world that they accept in a way,
Yes.
you know? So
Yes.
that's I found that really profound with the sound of silence. Or wait, did I get that um I'm messing up the title.
Yeah.
It's
Silent sound.
Silent Sound.
Or
I got it
yeah.
backwards.
I know. It's just like the sound of silence. Garfunkel,
Simon and Garfunkel.
Simon and Garfunkel.
But reversed. And in a way, the concept is
Reverse.
too, right? Like, so that you know what you want to say, but, or you know how to get the thing you want without having to say it. And like, it's interesting because, like, with music too, right? Like, we see people who are profound at music, and there's this expectation of
Mm.
being profound, and you have to say these certain words, like, you have to know this guitar lick to be a good guitarist or whatever. Where really it's that
Mm.
kind of babbling that brings that bliss. Um,
Mm. Yes, like Bach. Like
yeah,
people say Bach was the first jazz musician, the great improvisational
yeah.
inspiration.
And like, but there's that beauty and that profoundness of it. This just happened, you know. That's
Mm.
that's really cool. And on a side note, the melody you have for the chorus in that song is incredible. Is that one that
Oh,
came to
thank you.
you away from?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was actually playing the guitar with that, and I was singing that and I was writing it as a violin, as a string part,
yeah. Okay.
and then I thought, well, maybe I'll just sing it. Yeah.
Because I was listening. I've gone back to that track in particular more, just figure it out because there is the strings behind it. I'm like, are you doing the
Yeah.
doo, or is that the strings? And you're like, I had to like,
Yeah.
I was like, that's cool, because like that's hard to do. That's hard to sing that like that.
Yeah. Yes, I'm singing what would be I suppose, the descant violin part, and I have Andy Studer playing the harmony below it on the violin, and I'm singing the melody. Yeah.
That's very well put together. That's really cool. Um, Going back to like it also kind of makes me think of older women or grandmother from the album
Yeah.
The Raven, like that kind
Hmm.
of song structure. Um, like The Raven, like what that's a great record too, and like but a completely A and B like stylistically
Hmm.
approach, but
Hmm.
your voice fits very well in that register, that kind of flowiness that this record really kind of like highlights. And on
Thank
maybe
you.
it's on the nature of a Indian kind of influenced music. So it's interesting, like, because every record you'd put out like is completely different, which most people
Mm.
don't do in a way, and it's completely different in a way that seems very genuine to who you are in each stage of your musical career.
Thank
Um,
you.
so like, is that I don't want to say is that something you intended on because it seems like it's something that just happened at the moment.
I think it's just what happened at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, maybe that people always are asking me, is there any similarity between your acting part of yourself and your musician part of yourself? And maybe that's it. Maybe that I'm in a certain trying to express a certain persona. And I mean, I haven't thought of this. You're just putting the idea into my head. I don't know if that's true, but I've been influenced by all sorts of different kinds of music. I love all sorts of different kinds of music.
Right.
So maybe that's why as well that I'm interested in exploring different kinds of music.
That checks out. That
Mm.
like as a when you get into it, you start to like realize like, oh, like country music's rad. You know what I mean? Or you know what else is rad?
Yes.
Like just stuff you would not think you would be into, and then you're trying to talk to your friend who's like likes what they like, and they're like, "Yeah, have fun with that bluegrass record." Okay, banjos are cool.
Yeah.
I get it. Or you know what I mean? Like you're trying
God,
to
I wish I could play bluegrass.
right.
I'm in awe of those people. Yeah.
Well, I imagine with like the kind of the Scottish folk tunes, there's a lot of overlap
Oh
with
my
the
God.
the
Oh my
flow of
God.
that.
Yes, yes. There's so many connections.
Was it with well another I did an interview with Victor Wooten, and
Mm.
his wife is an actress, and like he was bringing up this point where he's like, I think every musician should take an acting class, and like
Mm.
even just like for the performance aspect of it being on stage, but
Mm.
also kind of like going off what you just said, I'd imagine like already being in that headspace, of course, like a new part or a new like style of music would become appealing because that's how you
Mm.
better your craft is being able to like wear those
Mm.
multiple musical caps.
Yeah, and it kind of wakes you up as well.
Yeah,
It wakes you up out of a kind of stupor, and it's exciting.
yeah.
Makes you alive. Yeah.
Because like I'm trying to remember the bad poetry. That the record
Mm.
like that one there's like some punk elements on that, which was really like
Yeah.
going from like the Raven to that. I was like, whoa, that's cool.
I know. Well, like you see, I was so into punk as a
Yeah.
kid in Edinburgh growing up. Oh God, yeah, I loved it.
Who are
I,
some of the punk bands you were into?
like my favorite was Susie and the Banshees,
Nice.
and it's little post-punk. I would call
Yeah.
that art punk kind of alternative. I remember when the Sex Pistols came in. I was still listening to ABBA,
Yeah.
which I love. I
Right.
love
Right.
ABBA.
Abba's great.
And then the Sex Pistols, and I was like, huh? And I remember seeing them on the news, and they're pogoing and they're spitting at the audience, and the audience is spitting back at them, and they're all like jumping up and down like lunatics, and they've got like piercings, and they're all like vomiting into the microphone, and I just was so revolted by it. And then Never Mind the Bollocks came out, and all my friends were listening. My boyfriends were
Yeah.
listening to it, and then I started to realize I really liked it. Yeah, especially John Lydon. I'm a huge fan of his.
Yeah.
He is brilliant.
Oh man, there's like I think part of that is like okay when you're not getting spit on, like there's something to this like approach to art, and the tunes are catchy and like energetic.
I think that's it in the end, is
Yeah,
he's a great writer and a
yeah,
great singer.
and like
Um, he's an artist, so that's what I connected with.
no, definitely, and
Yeah.
I think especially when it's like media when you're there and like the explanation is getting spit on and how horrible this is, of course, but when like it's really cool that because in any like field of art, there's the punk rock guy. There's the guy who said no and did their own thing,
Yeah, I
like in
know, I
classical
know.
music or
Yes,
and
Stravinsky.
right. I was thinking of Stravinsky. Like it's anyone who sticks to their guns. It's like that's refreshing.
Mm. Hmm. That's why I loved John Lennon too.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was dangerous and wrote some really fucking weird stuff, which I loved.
Yeah. Yeah, no, his especially like I'm trying to think. I mean, Double Fantasy was in there, but Mind Games was pretty out there in the bits.
Yes.
The
Well,
first.
like, what about Revolution Number Nine?
Right,
And
right.
like really, but then like Tomorrow Never Knows and stuff like that. I'm a
Uh,
huge Beatles fan.
it's hard. Their music's so in the ethos. It's like
Hmm.
even they did the combination of like in
Well,
with
I was
Ravi Shankar.
I
Yeah.
was very inspired by that, by George Harrison's work with them, and his influence. His bringing all that influence into their sound is just, I mean, I don't know, just genius.
Right. And like how they did it without changing themselves,
I know, yeah.
that's the hardest but the most amazing thing is how do you incorporate you in this.
Yeah.
Another thing I found interesting. I was talking with this metal band from India called Doombar, and
Yeah.
they use traditional instruments from their village, and they're not like the typical traditional instruments found in, like, it's not like sitar. It's like it's like a weird string, almost like lute, and like it's almost very Western how it looks, how it's played, and how they described how it's played. Like it's almost like played with a pick, and it's um,
Yeah.
but certain it's weird. It's interesting that certain aspects of culture don't appreciate the kind of melding of like of that with other parts of culture, you know,
Hmm.
and like
Well, I mean, I think there's a strong religious component
right,
to Indian classical music.
definitely,
Um,
definitely.
so that has to be revered and respected. And I mean, I really wanted to be ultra sure that my record is a Western record. I'm just using,
Yeah.
um, I'm using inspiration from that culture, but it's of course it's not Indian music at all. It's Western music. Um, and I love Indian classical music, and it's something that I could never do. I'm just not in that culture.
Well, just even that the rhythm of their you know what I mean? Like it's interesting how just rhythm where you grow up is so natural. Like 4/4 is nothing for people on the in the West. That's nothing. You know that we got that.
Yeah,
But when it gets to be 9, like or like
yeah. They have all these long patterns, like
right,
16, and I forget what they're called. But I'm working with an Indian drummer. He played tabla on this record, Satnam Ramgotra, and he um, is telling me bits and pieces as we go along. It's fascinating.
the
Yeah.
pada and like they
Yes.
count
And
with their
the
hand.
kid and they learn as kids, and they have to speak their instrument before they play the instrument,
Ooh, that's
which
interesting. Yeah.
with their yeah, they have to vocalize it
Mm.
using these syllabic rhythmic structures. It's really complex and just wildly beautiful.
Right.
Um, mm,
That it brings a kind of a bigger idea to the parts of speech, you know, and pieces of
mhm,
sound in a way, like
mhm,
how that leads to that expressed on like a on tabla or even with the do re mi fa so, right? Like
mhm.
the
Yeah,
symbolic nature of melody. That's really
yeah,
cool. Cause I luck like one really cool thing that I'm lucky to have experienced a lot is I went to Cleveland State to study music
yeah,
therapy, and
yeah.
we would have I guess one of the I don't want to say it's the maybe they called it the biggest, but one of the more pronounced Carnatic Indian music festivals out of India. So once a
Wow,
year, it just got school became the coolest place ever, and like I didn't want to go
wow.
to any classes because I just wanted to see these. They had all day for a week these amazing like Carnatic Indian performances, and
God.
Carnatic being like there's Western India classical music, and Carnatic being more of like the religious and scripture based or Dharma
Mhm,
based
mhm,
and like less focused on like kind of expanding beyond that palette. Or maybe not, I don't
mhm,
want to say expanding, but more focused on carrying the tradition. And
mhm,
it was really interesting to see because there were some like crossover ensembles and stuff. And like just
mhm.
seeing that like we sat in some like counting classes, you know, like or
Yeah,
rhythms, and it's so natural when you grow up with it, and that's just part of you trying to reach the dial of the end of the
yeah,
bar. Like
yeah. And you discover um, when you're taught by people, like by Indian teachers in yoga, that there's all this music going on within us, which is our own music. It's the music of our bodies make sounds, interior sounds, because there are machines and we make sound. The breath makes sounds, and it makes all sorts of different sounds. and uh, but just simply talking to ourselves in an uh, inward way, right, mentally, creates reverberation. And it's a fascinating thing to witness when you can get into that place of a sort of detached place and a witnessive place. There's a whole world of stuff going on, which we're not aware of in our normal waking state, normal everyday,
Yeah.
mundane worldly existence, as Prashant Iyengar would say.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I've never thought of it like that. That's really profound. It's
Mm.
because it is. When we're thinking, because there's certain parts of because I also studied NMT, which is neurologic music therapy. There's certain bits within like the research that they say like if you practice mentally, it's equal to
Mm.
practicing your instrument physically,
Mm-hmm.
and in
Mm.
some cases
Mm-hmm.
better. I may be quoting that wrong, but still, the idea of running something in your head has the same vibration as it would in the
So
physical existence.
interesting.
Yeah,
That's so interesting.
and it's interesting, like how a lot of like scientific kind of like uh, advancements or like new proven things are long known ideas, and like
Yeah, of course, in these ancient traditions, yes.
yeah. Um, do you ever I'm trying Kirtan? Have you ever done Kirtan
I
yoga?
haven't.
No.
No, I haven't. But I'm interested to go and see a Kirtan concert.
Was it
Um,
I went to a Kirtan festival years ago, and
mm,
like it's kind of like I in my mind relate it to the part of it that I saw Tom Petty years ago too. It's like the part when
mm.
he gets everyone to sing "Free Fallin'" back to him. That's the whole
Oh,
festival, except for
yeah.
that's the whole song, and like that's the most fun part is being
Yes.
in that group and being with everyone at that moment to recite this thing back. There's like
It's
this,
transformative.
yeah,
Yes.
and like it's interesting, like like that's a core idea of like Kirtan and like sharing the dharma of what's being said within that. I don't know if I'm using that right, or the scripture that's being sung within that, um, back and relating to that concept and really like just being with it. And like it's the same thing, and it's interesting how many of those same kind of concepts find their way in different cultures in different ways. And like how maybe more brash in some cultures, like free falling, yeah, like,
Yeah.
and how maybe more thoughtful in others. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. They have the few that I went to had one of those pump organs. It's like half an accordion, and they just use
Yes,
that for the
the
drum.
harmonium.
Harmonium, yeah. That's
Yeah, I love that instrument.
um. Now working with this tabla player, I think I read or I heard in another interview for this album, you're working on like three different ensembles to perform it live.
Yes. Yes, because I'm doing a gig in New York at Joe's Pub on the 19th of September, and I'm working with New York musicians over there. I'm doing a gig in Los Angeles at McCabe's on the September the 24th, which is like a record release show, and I'm working with my LA musicians here. And then I'm working as a duo with Andy Studer. The two of us are going to do a gig for what's called Echoes. It's a radio concert which will be broadcast to all sorts of different radio stations. We're doing that on the 15th of September. So I'm playing this uh, basically three different gigs, three different set lists. I'll be playing music from this record most extensively in Los Angeles with the bigger band. I'll be playing some of it in New York as well. Um, and then I'll be playing a little bit of it as well, just as a duo. So I'm working on all sorts of iterations of it. That the album, the recording itself, is quite layered. as you know. Um, so I'm working on ways to bring it, uh, simplify things,
Yeah. Is that like a
which is a lot of fun.
yeah?
Hmm.
Nice. Because I imagine like it'd be kind of like working up from the almost backwards from the minimalist one to like the full one because that one would have all the possibilities to make the record. Um,
Yeah.
but like, is there like a handful of tunes that you know are going to carry each time?
Yes, I'll be playing Sviambu. I'll be playing Silent Sound. I'll be playing a song called The Ladder. I'll be playing the first song on the record, Now Begins. Um, in Los Angeles, I'll be playing that quite complex song, Tiny Room. Uh, and I'll be playing Rudra Deva in Los Angeles as well. That's a sort of more punky
Yeah.
song on the record.
Was it now begins kind of on that concept like I like how it has like the harpsichord it sounds like at the beginning and like blends it into everything. That's a really like to make it
Are
have
you
that.
talking about maybe the clouds are clearing at the end, where I like play the harpsichord at the
Oh yeah,
beginning
it
of the
is
song?
clouds are clearing.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, but that the blend of the two kind of like western and eastern kind of cultures in a way. I thought that was really well done.
Thank you. That's great.
Um but so like has guitar always been your main?
Yes. I'll also be playing Clouds Are Clearing, by the way, at in Los Angeles. I'll be playing more extensively from the record in Los Angeles.
Yeah, because that's a full
Uh,
full band. Sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
So, yeah, usually I've written on the guitar, usually, yeah,
okay,
and play the guitar. But I did quite a lot of composing on the bass too,
okay.
which is a different experience from working with the chords on the guitar. That also can take you to places you wouldn't go. When you switch instruments, you're going to write differently,
Right,
and
right.
that's a nice habit to get into.
It's also like it's kind of like the changing of roles because each role has a different spot
Yes,
in the band. Um,
yeah,
I always found it hard to sing and play bass. Like I'm not, so I feel way more
right,
comfy on the guitar singing and playing. Um,
right,
with one other thing, like I was a student of mine just got into and I'm really proud of them. They really got into they did their first musical and their first play, and
yeah.
it was super cool to see, right? And like
I bet.
they're in high school, and like it was interesting because I'd never really thought of it until witnessing them performing, but the idea of rhythm within a play or acting in that sense, and like how
Hmm.
it's like kind of experienced throughout the whole body, and like
Hmm.
you can still be off time and on time or syncopated, but in a different manner. Like coming from acting, did you notice like an easier time making that or having the kind of a musical expression with that? Like I guess what I'm trying to say is because you're also a musician, does a rhythm within acting become an easier thing to do because you have a musical mind or vice
It
versa?
becomes an easier thing to do if the script is musical,
Oh, okay.
if the script is rhythmically correct, as for example in a Shakespeare play or a David Mamet play or a play by Samuel Beckett.
Okay.
That is like performing a piece of music, actually.
Then like is it like a
Or a play by Harold Pinter, for example.
okay. Okay.
Um, the better the writing is, you'll find the more like performing a piece of music is. That's what I've found
Hmm. That's
because it it carries you in its rhythms, and you're so supported by the musicality of the script. It just makes everything so much easier.
hmm.
And when something is less accomplished, then you have to work much harder as an actor to find to make the rhythms work.
Hmm. That would make sense. Like, it seems like songs that are more ballad like or loose felt, like with not a
Hmm.
defined time signature, are harder to play because of that. Because you really got to find your own groove within that.
And they're more exposed as well, I
Yeah,
suppose. Every note is more exposed.
yeah. Because
So it has to be played perfectly. That's what bass players say. They say it's a real art to hit the note in the center of the note and have the full expression, all the harmonics on each side of all around the perfect pitch of the note is just the great art of bass playing. And it's those um, it's those passages where the notes are heard clearly by themselves, that are can be more challenging than the noodling around or riffing.
right, because you can it goes quick to the end of the cadence, right? You didn't have time to realize, well, that was kind of weird.
The
Like, wow, that's cool. That's one. Um, I have a
tone, I suppose, and
yeah,
violinists, string players, they're looking for that beautiful tone. It's so important to find it, and that's part of their virtuosity.
and
And you could say the same with singers.
yeah, it's interesting because it's like that going back to that that kind of center tone that resonates best with
Mm.
your
Hmm.
your physical exterior, because everyone has like
Hmm.
a different set of
Yeah,
pipes
we all
and
have a different instrument. Yeah, inside there, the vocal box. Yeah, and the ohm. When you say ohm, it's like having a sound bath, an
yeah,
interior sound bath. That's why I think singing makes people happy. They say that you're activating a different part of your brain when you're singing, when you're or playing an instrument,
yeah,
and you are creating these harmonious vibrations in your body. It lifts your spirit.
yeah. It's interesting because like you activate a bunch of part of your brains when you do music or even listen to music. There's so much going on,
Ah,
and one of the oldest part of the what they call the lizard brain, I can talk,
yeah,
um, the cerebellum is really activated with rhythm and with the idea of breathing, right? We don't think about breathing, but that cerebellum's keeping that going. And
yeah,
when you sing and play in a group, that you release this neurochemical called oxytocin, which is
yeah.
released with motherly child bonding, and it
Uh-huh,
has the
uh-huh.
sense of trust and the sense of love within it,
Yeah,
as well as in other circumstances. But like, it's definitely I live for little nuggets like that because it's so cool, and like the idea of
yeah,
finding that pitch within yourself and finding what makes that tone resonate is really
yeah,
profound. Um,
yeah.
one thing, like I was talking with I have a couple friends that are diving into acting, and one friend was telling me about the oh, I just forgot the name of the method where you repeat over and over and over again.
Oh, I know what you're talking
Yes,
about.
gosh, what's the name of the
What the
method?
hell is it?
Ah,
I think it's
uh,
just called repetition, isn't it? Or
I forget. She had a certain name for it. I know. My girlfriend's
and it was
screaming right now. Um,
Stanford Meisner technique.
Meisner. That's what it is.
Meisner, yeah.
The idea of like repeating this thing over and over and over again until you just react to it when you're doing it um, is 100% how you do music. You just play that
Hmm.
passage over and over and over
Yes,
again,
that's true. Yeah.
and like then kind of relating it to like an idea of a mantra. You repeat this thing to yourself over and over again until it becomes unthought of and
Hmm.
just becomes it
Hmm.
becomes one in a way. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess bringing all that up, I don't know. My question would be: did you experience that in these different practices and kind of see an overlap?
Yeah, I've been experiencing all sorts of things. Not,
Well, I'd hope
not
so.
that
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not that I'm an enlightened person at all, or highly qualified yoga practitioner at all. But yes, the deeper one goes into one's practice, the more astounding and deep the experiences are. And the more, and I don't know how to say this without sounding trite, but you experience other worlds, of
Mm.
awareness and joy. And it's not, it's not like being high or anything. It's just, it's just a state of glimpsing a kind of bliss.
Mm. No, I think that makes sense, and I think the more you involve yourself in any one of those practices, you understand that bliss, right? Like the idea of someone being like, "I'm gonna play this passage on my piano until I can do it in front of people, so no one claps," and you're like, "Well,
It's largely to do with getting rid of your ego,
right,
getting rid of the subjective entity, the I, and becoming a witness.
mm,
That helps us get rid of the burden of so many of our pains, and our sorrows. And it's a freeing experience. And I suppose that's what actors, I mean, it's called being in a work in a flow, right? When you're and people, we all experience this. When we're in a flow, we're unself-conscious. We're in communion with the act of whatever it is we're doing. And it's there's all sorts of different ways of being creative. Everybody has creative urges and is creative. And when we're in that flow, that's when we experience a state of egolessness, which is a kind of joy. Our ego is is the cause of so much trouble and so much pain for us.
it is," and like it's interesting, like when you get to that point, and if it could be anything you're doing, if it's you at home, like just prepping for whatever holiday meal and like you're just cooking or doing
Exactly.
this thing,
Yeah.
you're like not even worried if you're doing it right, you're just doing it at one point,
Yes.
or just
Yes.
cleaning the
Yeah.
room or cleaning the house or
Exactly. Like organizing the drawer, or whatever it is. And you get this feeling. I don't know if you've had this. Like the sentence comes into your mind. I'm feeling really happy right now. I'm feeling really happy, and you're doing something that's soothing and comforting, and it's simple.
yeah. And like I guess for me, I guess like this is awesome. Like or you're I feel lucky for this part. I think that's what pops in my head. Like it's so cool that I can do this right now. Like even if it is
Yes.
like just
Sense of gratitude. A
right.
sense of gratitude, which so often we don't feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a great it's such a great moment when we do feel it.
And it always seems to be like burdened by is this right, or you just comparing it to like the kind of the other or outside of the self,
Yes.
or making
Yeah.
it seek more meaning where really it just has to be just that. And like
Yeah.
but those moments are they're few and far in between, but
Yeah.
I don't know, it's always kind of the practice to get back to that, and
Yeah.
finding that with
Exactly. Yeah.
what your craft is like that's I guess the level of close to mastery when you're not worried about it and you're just doing it and having fun, and other people are
Yeah.
just inspired that you're being you.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why it's great for us to sit at the feet of sages and learn from them,
For sure.
because they are embodiments of joy, like the Dalai Lama, or that you feel immediately soothed by these inspiring people, by these saintly people. Um, and the first thing I notice about them is their great sense of joy. That's what I noticed about Guruji, about BKS Iyengar.
Yeah.
He was a radiant person.
and they make it simple, right? Like the idea of doing the
Yeah.
dishes or cleaning the that's a
They make
simple
everybody
thing. Yeah.
around them, they lift everybody around them.
Yeah.
And it's important to make that a discipline in our lives, I think, to seek out teacher, wise people, because it lifts us out of the doldrums. It's a support for us. It's a support for our minds and practice, because we can't do it on our own. We're never, we're ordinary people. We need to be uplifted. Uh, we need to read noble texts. We need to study the words of noble people, and that's, we find our path. That's one of the ways we can find our meaning, meaning of life, because it's so easy to sink into a kind of despondency, which is a kind of disease, dis-ease.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
No, I definitely agree. And like I think that was very well said. And like I guess the kind of on the idea of like simplest, like when you think of melodies or music that really resonates, and I guess it goes back to the idea of like the Sex Pistols, like it's simple stuff, but it hits home, and it's hard to do something so impactfully simple.
well, there's something so emotion, great music at its best does kind of, it hits your heart, and it brings out an emotion, I guess, and can make you feel a sense of sort of being unified with other people. I mean, I don't know how the Sex Pistols did that quite, but I, I, I don't know. They made me laugh. They made me just feel happy.
Yeah. Well, if anything, they show you can do it. If they can do it, you can do that.
I don't know if I could do what John Lydon does, but
Well, you'll know for sure. We all can only do our own thing. But
yeah.
the fact that
It
someone,
reminds me of like when it takes all kinds. When I remember walking into a room, seeing my daughter, age 2, she was watching The Wizard of Oz. It was the first time, and I thought, right, I've got to be there, when the Wicked Witch comes on, and like monitor her and see how she's doing. And
yeah,
because the Wicked Witch of the West just absolutely was just my source of terror as a young child. And
yeah,
I looked at my daughter, the Wicked Witch comes on, and my daughter's face lit up in delight, just like this enormous smile across her face, just like utter, like, wow, that is awesome. Like the look of delight on her face. I thought, you are a really different person from me. But yeah, so that's what the Sex Pistols did to me.
that's true. I think that was a beautiful way to put that. Have you have they dove into music or yoga at all? Your kiddos?
Um, they're both very musical. Yeah, my son is a composer. He does lots of composing for like video game music. He's
Yeah,
really good.
very
Yeah,
cool.
really, really talented, and constantly doing it. And my daughter is also very musical, but she's not really doing anything with it. But she's a huge music lover. She's a wonderful singer.
That's
She can
awesome.
listen to any piece of music once and
Yeah,
remember it like for the rest of her life. Yeah, like something I can't do.
that's. I wish I had that skill too. Jeez,
Yeah.
that's a good one
She's
to have.
always coming up with something, and I say, how do you remember that? Because it's something that she and I saw, years ago, and
Yeah,
I've forgotten.
that's incredible. Has your son published with any video games? Like if I look up like a game, I can hear his piece.
He's got stuff online. I think
Okay,
his writer name is Mammoth Plant,
very
and
cool.
um, he's got a huge SoundCloud list of compositions, and he's worked on um, video games with other people, but he's working on his own video video game called Mirrored Soul,
Wow,
and yeah, he's really talented.
that's incredible. I have so many kiddos that like strive to do that. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Well, Rebecca, this has been a pleasure of a conversation. I really appreciate your
Oh,
time.
it's such a pleasure.
and I really enjoyed diving into your career. And you're a
Thank
phenomenal
you.
songwriter and musician and actor. And
Thanks.
I appreciate the time. Thanks, Rebecca. Have a good day.
Thanks, Dave. You too. Bye. Bye.
Yo, Spike Spiegel here. You just listened to Zig at the Gig podcast. Keep riding the bebop. See you, Space Cowboy. Bang.